I've been using a Mac Pro since 2008 as my primary computer, and I'm currently using a Mac Pro 2019, but it's starting to get a bit old.
At some point in the near future, Apple will drop support for it. However, I won't be buying an Apple Silicon Mac Pro to replace it, as quite frankly, it's not worth it. It's $3,000 more than a Mac Studio of a similar spec, and those PCIe slots can't be used for GPUs, nor can any of the components that it ships with be upgraded, minus the SSDs, sorta.
So the question becomes, where do I go from here?
I started this series looking at Sonnet PCIe enclosures because you can add PCIe slots to any modern Mac.
The enclosure is really useful, but what I really think I need is a network attached storage device, or NAS, which is basically a home server. That way I'm not entirely relying on Apple. While editing this video, I realized it's a bit hyperbolic to say I'm just replacing my Mac Pro with a NAS, but the modern Mac Pro, at least this iteration of it, only offers more high-speed storage and maybe a few other options like video editing cards. That is about it. So why wouldn't I want to spend less money, get a equally as powerful Mac Studio, or even go cheaper and just complement it with a NAS? So yeah, I'm tipping my hand what this video is about.
And at least my data can live in a more open ecosystem. The advantage of having a NAS is you can host your own personal cloud, and since these are x86 computers, you can run virtual machines on them that you can't run on an Apple Silicon Mac. That's clearly not the same as being able to dual boot, but at least you can virtualize environments that might not have ARM versions. Plus, a NAS is going to be more upgradable than a Mac because you can jam oodles of storage in them in the form of hard drives and SSDs, and they almost always have upgradable RAM.
I just uploaded my video and it's set to go live today, but of course at WWDC, Apple announced that Apple will be dropping support for its Intel Macs and macOS Tahoe. So just keep that in mind, and it makes this video even more prescient. As I increasingly become some sort of weird tech hermit,
writing my own blog posts on a self-hosted blog, refusing to acknowledge TikTok,
and avoiding all social media that isn't YouTube, having my own personal cloud sounds increasingly desirable. And I really like the idea that my photos aren't being used to train AI.
And I can retain ownership over the media I bought. I reached out to Ugreen, and to my surprise, they wanted me to collaborate and highlight their Ugreen NAS DXP 4800 Plus.
I apologize as you will hear me pronounce NAS as Nas like the rapper, because I'm a hip-hop head. They wanted to know if I could make a video highlighting how I could integrate one of their NASs into my current setup. But don't tell them this, I would have made this video even if it wasn't sponsored. Oh yeah, that's right, this is my first sponsored video I've ever done, and the only reason is because this is something that's actually interesting to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it.
And you'll be hearing my opinions because the DXP 4800 Plus is really good, but not perfect. I wanted to get my hands on a Ugreen NAS because I already own a Synology NAS, and I even made 2 videos about it. It's one of my favorite pieces of technology, but without getting to recent drama, Synology has made some decisions that make it tougher to recommend their latest NASs. The popular Make QNAP has had its own set of drama around security. Ugreen being the new guy means a blank slate, and there's a lot of opportunity for them. The biggest challenge is competing against Synology's DSM, an operating system that's polished, very powerful, and easy to use. Despite some of the other companies' missteps, this is not an easy space for Ugreen to break into, and they originally did this on Kickstarter of all things, making it even more interesting and unusual. Ugreen has its own operating system, another Linux fork called UGOS Pro, and I'll get to that, but first, let's talk about the hardware specs. Ugreen is really pushing the hardware capabilities at this price point. The model they sent is the DXP 4800 Plus. At the time of writing this, it's roughly about $600 with a lot better specs per dollar than most of the competition. It has a 5-core Intel Pentium Gold 8505 CPU, a chipset that I was totally aware that existed before this video, 10 gigabit and 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports, dual M2 NVMe slots, an HDMI output, multiple USB ports, and a card reader. It comes with 8 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM that can be expanded to 64 gigabytes. For comparison, Synology's DS925 Plus, which is their latest version of their 4-bay NAS, has roughly half the processing power, doesn't have HDMI, doesn't have 10 gigabit Ethernet, and only has a maximum of 32 gigabytes of RAM and less USB ports, and charges roughly the same. It also has the caveat of limited hard drive support, but Synology does have an expansion port that allows for more drives to be added. Ironically, my previous generation DS923 Plus does have gigabit Ethernet by way of an upgrade and doesn't have the hard drive restrictions, but has even less CPU horsepower. If you don't care about 10 gigabit Ethernet performance, Ugreen does make a non-plus version of the DXP 4800 for $500 with a smaller, more power-efficient chipset, more in line with Synology's DS925 Plus. Ugreen also has wider hard drive support on all its models, so on paper, Ugreen looks great, but doesn't tell me anything about the software. That's why I really wanted to get my hands on this thing. Ugreen was kind enough to include hard drives, 4TB WD RED drives for me to test. Installing the HDDs is entirely a toolless process and goes fast. Plugging it in is where I got a little bit dumb. I saw the USB ports and the HDMI port and assumed I'd just plug in a keyboard and mouse and monitor to set it up, or at least to help me set it up. It did not. Setting it up actually just requires a mobile app, which is a little different. I prefer a WebPaint interface, but all I had to do was plug in my NAS to the local network and turn it on, then the app just detected it. This gives it kind of a web appliance feel. From there, I just stepped through the configurator on my iPhone. The app lets you do basic management like set up a RAID pool, but we need to take a detour and talk about RAID and Mac OS. I set up my drives for RAID 5. This is one spot where Synology just has a clear advantage, as they have their own RAID alternative with SHR that lets you use different sized hard drives. And they're not the only ones. TerraMaster has T-RAID, which is similar. If you happen to use different sized hard drives on a RAID 5 array, any extra disk space will be ignored on the larger drives. This is a common limitation for many NAS setups, as both SHR and T-RAID or TRAID are proprietary disk systems.
Just to make that extra clear, when you want to make a RAID 5 array, which you can do on a Synology NAS or on a Ugreen NAS, all you need to do is buy all the same size hard drive.
Creating a RAID 5 pool takes a few hours, even with 4TB drives, and while we wait for the RAID pool to finish, as a brief refresher, RAID is a strategy that allows volumes to span across multiple drives to maximize their reliability or speed, or balance between the two. RAID is not a backup system, but using RAID 5 or 6 adds in redundancy, which means more stability and speed than using a single hard drive. You'll still want to back up your irreplaceable data, but in a RAID 5 array, a single drive could fail, and you won't have any immediate data loss. You might be wondering why you would even want to bother with a more expensive NAS when you can just buy a external multi-drive enclosure. The answer? macOS RAID support sucks. Out of the box, macOS does not support RAID 5 or 6, and even using third-party products like SoftRAID means dealing with oddities. OWC has an entire article chronicling the status of SoftRAID, as Apple has a habit of breaking it or creating issues for it with OS updates. In my experience, RAID is more trouble than it's worth on macOS, and I fully expect to be trashed in the comments for that opinion.
While I'm a pretty dedicated Mac user, I'm definitely not above admitting when it has its shortcomings, and RAID is definitely one of them, and Linux has a clear advantage, so I much prefer it to handle my RAID array. And also, Apple just seems actively hostile towards sane storage solutions.
Alright, it's done formatting. While the mobile app offers many features, UGOS Pro is where the action happens. You access your NAS's OS via the web browser, and you can do this from anywhere. This is how Synology's DSM OS works, and I assume their competitors do too. Just punch in the URL and sign in. I don't know why, but I just really get a kick out of the OS in a web browser, but not a VNC connection experience. I was a bit worried because this could make or break the entire package, but the operating system is a bit more polished than I expected, and it looks and feels similar to DSM's crisp web app. One thing that's striking is Ugreen has really adopted the visual language of Apple with its aqua-like rounded corners, icons, and even the traffic-like controls, whereas DSM is closer to Windows 11 or a Linux GUI. Visuals aren't that important if the OS is a pain to use, but it works as expected. Right out the gate, you'll want to install apps as they'll extend your NAS's functionality. Want media hosting so you can stream your entire music and movie collections remotely? You got it. Photos host them? Yep, it has that too. The app selection is small compared to the likes of Synology, but Ugreen has only been shipping NASs since like 2024, and most of the apps that I wanted were there, although I was a bit surprised that Plex was an option. However, you can install third-party apps, and I saw people on Reddit who had installed Plex on their Ugreen. Unlike Synology, the DXP 4800 Plus even supports hardware decoding for movies.
It wasn't until very late in making this video did I realize that my Synology can't do what you just saw, which was playback video in a window like the Ugreen can.
That said, they offered the most critical apps, at least for me, Docker and a virtual machine host and Jellyfin. I also installed the recommended suite of apps as well. These are the ones that let you define your own personal cloud. I don't really have a smooth transition to my next topic, but it's virtual machines. This is where having more juice in the tank really helps. If you're serious about VMs, you'll want to dump more RAM into this guy. But Ubuntu performed pretty well when I only gave it 4 GB of RAM. Setting up the VMs is brain dead easy. I just uploaded a Ubuntu ISO and installed it like normal. In Geekbench 6 running inside a Ubuntu virtual machine, I was able to get roughly the same single core performance as my Mac Pro 2019 does natively. It's little things like this that remind me that my Mac Pro 2019 is getting a little out of date. The real question is, can you play Doom on it? And the answer is yes. Poorly, but yes. This is because you have to do it over the VNC connection, which adds in quite a bit of latency. This unit does not have direct HDMI output for VMs. If Ugreen added that, since it supports USB pass-through to virtual machines, you could legitimately use this as a standalone computer. There might be a way to hack in this support, but I didn't see an easy way to do it. I'd love to do something nerdy like install Kodi on a Mint VM and have a media PC, but as it stands, it just supports VNC. When it comes to HDMI output, it's really basic. It's probably one of the easiest things I've ever used for movie playback that isn't a streaming service. There's a theater app that's controlled by your phone, and all you have to do is point it to the library on your NAS, and it'll automatically scrape all the movie data. I copied over a few random movies to make sure it'd play back various formats, like using AVIs and MKVs in 720p, 1080p, and 4K using codecs like XVID, H.264, and H.265. And it worked pretty great and supported subtitles in MKVs. By default, it'll stream these directly to your phone, but if you hit the little share button, it'll do it through the HDMI port. Basically, you don't need to install Jellyfin or Plex for this machine. When it came to Docker, I wanted to do my absurd test of using Docker/macOS to install macOS into a VM, and I got to the installer, but it was misbehaving. I don't think this was Ugreen's fault, but everything else worked as expected. So if you probably spend a few more minutes than I did, you could probably run macOS on this machine as a virtual machine. Ugreen for its photo app uses on-device machine learning, which Ugreen touts as a privacy-focused AI-powered photo album. You can choose what models you want to install or even try training your own. If you search waterfalls, it finds waterfalls. This feature feels a bit like a public beta, but while reviewing this unit, they updated the Photos app and a few models which improved things and fixed a location error I was experiencing. This makes sense as it's a new feature and seems to be improving by the week. Ugreen specifically asked me if I'd test my performance against my Synology, as both have 10 gigabit and both have dual NVMe for caching for accelerated writes and reads. My Synology, despite having the lesser chipset, still has a few minor advantages. It has dual 2TB SSDs instead of dual 512GB SSDs, and has 32GB of RAM. However, the storage pool is using SHR, which I've read is a hair slower than using RAID 5. It is using two 12TB drives and two 18TB drives. But these are denser drives, and density generally increases performance on hard drives.
One place where Ugreen clearly has an advantage is SSD performance.
And it's not because I use crappy SSDs in my Synology. I use really good ones. This particular Synology only has one PCIe lane per slot. The first run was weird because the Ugreen underperformed, taking 2 minutes and 10 seconds, whereas it took 1 minute and 50 seconds for the Synology to transfer the file. But after that, the SSD cache seemed to engage, and I was able to transfer a 43GB file in an impressive 47 seconds. The Synology was never able to clock below 1:40. I believe the newer version of my Synology NAS, the DS925, has better SSD performance, but it is capped at 2.5GB Ethernet without an upgrade path.
2.5GB Ethernet kinda makes SSDs moot because of the limited bandwidth.
You can also create pure SSD storage pools, which will cap out at a theoretical 1,250 megabytes a second. When I tried this myself, I was able to get about 1 gigabyte a second. So by default, the Ugreen is much faster just by merely including a 10 gigabit Ethernet port for transfer speeds, as 2.5 gigabit Ethernet is capped to about 300 megabytes a second. Even when the SSDs didn't engage, it was able to transfer about 400 megabytes a second. I was always going to test these transfer speeds because why wouldn't I? but it really makes sense why Ugreen wanted me to do this. If you're using 10 gigabit Ethernet, it really makes sense to put some SSDs in this guy. 4-bay NASs are kind of the sweet spot with 28 terabyte drives hitting the market, as you can have 112 terabytes of storage. In a RAID 5 configuration where you have parity, you would end up with about 84 terabytes of storage. In my quest to abandon my Mac Pro 2019, I've had to rethink how my digital life exists. For the past 2 decades and change, my strategy was just to have a big-ass computer with a bunch of hard drives and SSDs connected to it.
This has served me well, and it still does, but it is a tethered way of thinking.
This became apparent during the pandemic when I'd spend weeks away from my Mac Pro at a time. Instead, I'm moving away from having a pile of hard drives always connected to my Mac to a more nimble setup where I have access to my files without having to connect directly to physical drives.
Maybe your interests are a little different than mine, but personally speaking, DevOps and network administration is not my idea of a good time, so I was worried that adding a NAS would just be endless headaches.
Much worse than having a bunch of drives connected to a computer, but after using both Ugreen and Synology products, it's pretty uncomplicated, and it even makes things easier to share across the internet to friends and family. For example, I can find a file or folder on my Ugreen NAS from my phone and just click it and then click the share button to give someone temporary access to it. Basically, I have my own cloud. It's not cheap, but it's not super expensive either. Both of the NASs I've been talking about are at the $600 mark, whereas a USB enclosure is about $200 to $250, depending on if they support RAID or not. The most expensive part is packing these devices with hard drives, which is another story, especially in the era of idiotic trade wars.
I'm still not really sure where I want to go with my next Mac purchase, because I could just get a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio, or I could just get one really nice laptop. But whatever I choose,
the setup will have a NAS and a PCIe enclosure.
If I'm being completely honest with myself, I could replace my Mac Pro 2019 with a M4 Pro Mac Mini, and it would be faster for the majority of things I do, like web dev, making music, and editing videos.
Even if you tallied up the cost of an M4 Pro Mac Mini, a PCIe enclosure, and a NAS packed with 4 large HDDs, it'd still be half the cost of an Apple Silicon Mac Pro. And I could just swap out my Mac Mini every 2 to 3 years. If I need more storage, I'd just add it to my NAS, not my computer. So the TLDR is I'm going to replace my Mac Pro 2019 at some point with a less expensive Mac and a NAS. The PCIe enclosure thing is more of a nice to have. To circle back to Ugreen, they're really shaking up the NAS market. They're clearly trying to bring the same easy-to-use Synology experience that makes NASs for the masses. You get a lot more bang for your buck with Ugreen on the hardware side of things, with the trade-off being that it has a less mature software ecosystem.
Hopefully that'll improve with time, and I don't see why it wouldn't.
If you're looking for mostly a set-it-and-forget-it solution that stores your files, can play back movies over HDMI, and runs virtual machines or Docker images, Ugreen is a great purchase. It's zippier than my Synology and less expensive than my 923 Plus, as it required a 10 gigabit Ethernet upgrade. That said, there are places where Synology shines, like wider app selection for hardcore geek stuff like Auth integration, built-in Cloudflare support, and configurable VPNs, and even third-party package managers, and even drive bay expansions, just to name a few things that aren't as easily achieved on the Ugreen. Ugreen has published its 2025 roadmap under its system update plan with catch-up features like account lockout policies and password expiration management. If I had to read the tea leaves, I'd guess that they're looking to add more features for small and medium-sized businesses. I did touch on one feature they recently added, USB pass-through for virtual machines, which I don't think Synology supports, but don't quote me. Having the HDMI port is really great, even if it's limited. Playing movies off the device is pretty easy, making it a light home theater PC, and I hope they bake in HDMI support for virtual machines one day.
I only make product recommendations based on where they are today and not what they might be tomorrow. I know there's a couple of will they add thises or hopefully they'll add that's, and this is my honest opinion. Ugreen can't buy it, it's not for sale, so this is what I actually think, and that is that Ugreen has a hit here. This thing is a really good value, it covers all the bases, it's pretty fast too, and so if you're just looking to host files and share files through the internet and do the usual basics of like media serving and also through the HDMI port, something my Synology just doesn't have, and do other cool things like Docker containers and virtual machines, this will do that and then some. It's a great value, so I don't know what to say other than the only question is, will I switch to it from my Synology? And the answer is, not today. There's a chance tomorrow, but right now I just have a lot of money that I already invested into my Synology, like outfitting it with RAM, SSDs, and hard disk drives. I need to buy all more stuff for this guy to make it my full-time NAS. That's not to say I'm not going to do that in the future, and in fact, I probably will. I really like this thing, and I think most people will too. If you already have a NAS, it might be the one you want to upgrade to. If you don't have a NAS, this is a good my first NAS too, because it's easy to use. That was my biggest worry when I picked up this thing. I do think that there's strong points from the competition, and you just need to evaluate and see what works for you.
Also, be sure to check out the links in the description to get 15% off. I'd like to thank my Patreons and my cat Jeff, who oversaw me unboxing this.
Mild Easter egg, but did you see my cat in the background? He's there.